It's June 29, 2001, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Ariel, Rebecca, and Ali, the Retrospectors.
It was today in history in 2001 that the movie AI, Artificial Intelligence, finally arrived in cinemas after a production history stretching back almost 30 years. A joint labour of love by two of the most renowned American filmmakers of the 20th century, it should have been an instant classic. Instead, the San Francisco Chronicle's Mick LaSalle spoke for many critics when he labelled it a coupling from hell.
Yeah, it is astonishing how far back its production history goes. 1983 was the year that Stanley Kubrick acquired the rights to Supertoys Last All Summer Long, which was a short story written by Brian Aldiss. Over time, he then replaced Aldiss with a different writer, Ian Watson, and later brought in other people to help develop the screenplay. But over the years, he always felt like this was going to be a film that was very difficult to land, not least because of the special effects that were required. And it wasn't actually until Stanley Kubrick saw his fellow director and friend Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park that he thought, now the technology is good enough and I think this could actually fly.
Yeah, and the reason why the technology is important is because the story is all about a world in which technology it's caused climate change and Manhattan's underwater, and the solution to a child crisis is to have robot children, played by Haley Joel Osment, but looking like genuine artificial intelligence. You know, there's a robot body underneath, plausibly. There needed to be some pretty mind-blowing special effects for the period as part of the story to believe that the parents in the film would really bond with a robot as if it was a replacement for their child who's in an air chamber, having suffered some sort of illness which isn't actually explained. I mean, it's interesting, Rebecca, that you quote Mick LaSalle of the San Francisco Chronicle in your intro, because I'm going to quote yourself back at you, because I think actually your review of this film is possibly the best I've seen on our WhatsApp group. Quote, "You guys, that film sucked," capital letters, "but also I cried actual floods of tears maybe 4 separate times." And I think that is this film, isn't it? Like, yeah. It is a mess. This combination of kind of Spielbergian mawkishness and Kubrickian coldness. But you feel the touch of those two auteurs anyway. Like, there are moments in this film that are so haunting. David, this robot child, being abandoned for dead at the bottom of the pool. David being abandoned in the forest like Hansel and Gretel. The one that really gets me is the moment where his cheek slowly drops away from his robotic face as he goes into meltdown. It'll make you never want to eat spinach again. So definitely there are moments in this movie that are resonant, especially now watching it again as a parent. I'm thinking, this is heartbreaking. Like the whole scenario that's being acted out is about dead children. And yet, ultimately, it doesn't work.
It's true that on one level it doesn't work in the sense that stylistically you can sort of feel the two influences in there. Yeah, that is true. But also beyond that, I think subconsciously, the mindset you go in with when you're watching a Steven Spielberg film is different from the mindset you put yourself in to watch a Stanley Kubrick film, right? And I think most people like to know what kind of thing they're about to see just tonally. Like, you don't go into a Stanley Kubrick film and think, oh, I hope that little boy gets reunited with his mother. Yeah, you would go in being like, well, I'm not going to get attached to that possible outcome because that's obviously not going to be how it ends. Whereas Spielberg, because you know it's a Spielberg film, I think that's why I cried so many times, because I kept thinking, he wouldn't push this far. Why is he pushing this far? Like, it shouldn't be this sad. And I think that's maybe the part of AI that sat poorly with audiences and critics, was having certain expectations that then weren't met. It does create a bit of an emotional discordance.
We should say as well, the reason that Spielberg wrote and directed this movie was because Stanley Kubrick died. So Stanley Kubrick had a heart attack suddenly, just shortly after filming Eyes Wide Shut in 1999. It was a tribute to his friend Stanley Kubrick that Steven Spielberg finished this movie.
Yeah, and originally Spielberg had actually tried to persuade his sister Anne Spielberg, who was the co-writer of Big, to take on the script, and she didn't want it, so Steven Spielberg decided to write it himself, but he was drawing on this huge backlog of notes that Kubrick had put together for the film, not to mention 600 original storyboards that Kubrick had done with a collaborator, Chris Baker. And so there was already the great framework, but what Spielberg said himself was that Kubrick had left behind a brilliant first and third act, while the middle section, he said, contained pieces of a dream, but it was scattered.
And then he was like, you know what this needs? Jude Law as a sex worker.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and arguably he didn't manage to resolve that middle bit, which is peculiar.
It's so frustrating. Because it's like that first hour. I mean, the first hour is good. It's not just good. It's like 5 stars. You're like, this is a masterpiece. This is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
And then it's like, it's a weird textbook example in how a film that is actually 5 stars declines to 2 stars in the last hour. And it's because the end is mawkish and the middle is just weird.
Yeah, I think maybe part of it is the fact that a lot of the first act is based on that original short story by Brown Aldiss, Supertoys Last All Summer Long. As you alluded to, Aaron, he did draft in other writers. He actually, at one point, asked Arthur C. Clarke to write a treatment for it, which Clarke said afterwards was rejected instantly. He hated it and asked me to tear it up. So, this went on for some time. And so eventually...
I just love, though, that you've got that power. Do you know what I mean? That's like me having just asked Benny and Bjorn to write our theme song and then be like, actually, I don't want it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the people that Kubrick hit up, Ian Watson, did get story credit in the end, but the final script is credited to Spielberg, and partly that was because, on one hand, Spielberg said the story was already really, really sketched out in detail by Kubrick at this point. But when Kubrick died suddenly and Spielberg agreed to pick up the film, he was preparing already to make Minority Report, and so he didn't really have much time to find yet another writer to come up with another take on the script. So he just sort of did it himself, and in the end, he was still editing AI when he started shooting Minority Report. So it was a really tight turnaround, especially for a film that's so ambitious.
Yeah, and I think part of his own personal involvement to the exclusion of other people is why it ended up being a bit of a mess in the end. I mean, Stanley Kubrick himself was famously secretive, and he expected the same from Steven Spielberg, even at the point where he began sharing his notes about AI. He swore him to secrecy and made Spielberg describe the layout of his home, and only once he knew did he then allow Spielberg to install a secure fax line, and that fax machine was originally placed in Spielberg's bedroom until his wife, Kate Capshaw, got really tired of 3:30 a.m. messages and insisted that it be moved downstairs into the study. But then, taking his cue again from Kubrick, Spielberg adopted similar precautions while he was filming, and he barred visitors from visiting the set. He withheld the full script from cast and crew and required the film's stars to sign confidentiality agreements. And all of that, I think, allowed for the idea that maybe the film that was being constructed was going to be something like that first hour. Even from within the production, I could imagine people thinking, well, it's Kubrick, it's Spielberg. He's got a handle on what's going on here. Surely this is going to be good. But I think he could have used a bit more creative input, and perhaps that desire to maintain something of Kubrick's perfectionist creative control worked to the film's detriment.
I mean, we're saying detriment. This was a commercial hit. It's sort of remembered like
true.
It was a flop. It made $236 million worldwide, which is actually unthinkable today for a left field piece such as this, with essentially no stars in it. I mean, this would be a sort of Apple TV box set, wouldn't it? But it would not be a film. And it does speak to the relationship between the two men. People didn't know they had this relationship, but for over a decade, they'd been talking a lot. Kubrick used to call Spielberg's office and say to his secretary, it's Stanley Kubrick on the line. So she can't exactly say, sorry, he's busy. Can I speak to Steven? She'd say, well, he's in a meeting. And he'd say, it's fine, I'll wait. But he was calling collect. He was reversing the charges from Hertfordshire. so Spielberg's phone bill of talking to Kubrick went into 4 figures on a weekly basis. And they had this kind of correspondence where they would talk for hours about movies and just love movies in the same way that Scorsese and Coppola and Spielberg had. Yeah. And I think because Kubrick had this image of this loner who sort of marooned himself in England and did everything 500 times, there's a sense that he wasn't a collaborator, but he was. I mean, even on Schindler's List, for example, which Kubrick was particularly interested in because one of his projects that went for 30 years and never happened was his own Holocaust movie. His reported feedback to Steven Spielberg on, his Oscar-winning masterpiece was, the Holocaust is about 6 million people who get killed, and you've just made a movie about 600 people who don't. I mean, who gives feedback like that to Steven Spielberg? Do you know what I mean? I think that's what he valued in the relationship, was someone who could actually just tell him what he thought.
But I mean, this film, the whole film ended up being quite a win for Spielberg because, as you say, Ollie, it did well at the box office, but also over time it's kind of been reevaluated. It's now seen by students of Spielberg's canon as one of his most philosophically ambitious films and one of the most emotionally complex works of his career, and it's been called like prophetic for its treatment in particular of AI consciousness and ethics. But I'd be interested to know, Rebecca, which bits made you cry, because it is emotionally taxing to watch, I reckon.
I think probably I cried the hardest when she was abandoning him in the woods and he's like screaming not to leave him and everything.
Yeah, it's hard to watch. I mean, I actually think the ending is, like people say it's mawkish or overly sentimental, but I think it's brutal.
But also, the ending was like the subject of a big amount of the backlash because a lot of people, I mean, myself included, watching it, assume that the creatures at the end are aliens because they look like the aliens from Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Right.
Like, if you don't want people to... They're supposed to be super advanced versions of the robots that we've seen in the film, essentially.
That look less good than the humanoid ones.
Don't do something that looks exactly like aliens from your previous film and then blame people for watching it and being like, well, why were there aliens at the end?
So, I mean, Spielberg on a bad day is still better than us on a bad day. Do you know what I mean?
Now,
this episode first aired last year exclusively to members of Club Retrospectors.
Join today and unlock a new episode this Sunday.
Patreon.com/retrospectors